Usually when a company issues a massive press release announcing they've reduced their carbon footprint by, say, 30%.
Right, there's this immediate expectation of applause.
Exactly. The headlines roll in, investors nod approvingly, and it just feels like a clean, undeniable win.
Oh, it definitely feels like progress. I mean, we are totally conditioned to celebrate when we see the numbers going down on things like emissions or, water usage.
But then you step into the actual math of global carrying capacities, and suddenly that applause just completely dies down.
Yeah, it really does.
Because according to the source we are looking at today, a project that reduces its carbon footprint by 30% might still be emitting twice its fair share of carbon, which sounds counterintuitive, but better, absolutely does not equal sustainable.
It doesn't. And it highlights a massive diagnostic blind spot in how modern business operates. Like, if you are only measuring against your own past performance, we're measuring the wrong thing entirely.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are so thrilled to have you listening. Today, we are exploring the Sustainability Reporting Guide 1.12.
Authored by Dr. Joel Carboni for the PMI GPM Sustainability Joint Venture.
Yes, that's the one. And the mission of this deep dive is to fundamentally challenge how you view success in literally any project. We are shifting from the illusion of doing less bad to achieving authentic, context-based sustainability.
Okay, let's unpack this.
It is a profound paradigm shift, and it requires us to completely rewire our definition of value.
Exactly. And whether you are, managing a local community infrastructure build or overseeing a massive IT rollout or even just trying to accurately spot corporate greenwashing in the news.
Which is everywhere these days.
It really is. Understanding the true math behind sustainability is a game changer for your career and just how you view the market in general. So to get there, we first need to define the core problem with how businesses have historically measured project success.
Right. So for decades, project management has operated under what this guide calls a mono-capitalist paradigm. Mono-capitalist.
Yeah. Project success has basically been ruled by the iron triangle, which is scope, time, and cost.
Right.
If you delivered what you promised, on time and on budget, the project was deemed a resounding success. You optimized financial capital. And everything else, like the natural resources you extracted or the social impacts on the local community, they were just treated as externalities.
Basically, someone else's problem to solve down the line.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the guide introduces this multi-capitalist alternative. It argues that measuring financial capital alone is functionally broken. We actually need to track 5 distinct capitals.
5 of them. Okay.
Yeah. Natural, human, social, constructed, and economic.
And they're all interconnected, right?
Highly interconnected. A multi-capitalist approach recognizes that a project can generate, say, $1 billion in economic capital, but still be a catastrophic failure if it depletes a local aquifer.
Because that's natural capital.
Right. Or if it relies on labor paid below a living wage, which depletes human and social capital. You have to preserve and regenerate all vital capitals, not just the financial one.
Makes sense.
But what companies often do instead, mostly because it's easier, is fall into the trap of incremental sustainability.
Right.
They boast about relative improvements. They'll proudly state, hey, we reduced our water use by 20% this quarter.
But hold on, why isn't saving 20% of water a good thing? I mean, if a project manager hits their financial budget and manages to save water compared to the last project, aren't they doing exactly what they are supposed to do?
You would think so, but...
It's like me bragging that I cut back from smoking 2 packs a day to 1 pack.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right. Sure, it's a 50% reduction. That's a massive improvement. But my lungs are still failing. It's better, but it's absolutely not healthy.
Yeah. What's fascinating here is how the guide draws a hard line between that concept of being less bad and being genuinely sustainable.
Right.
Incremental improvements, like your smoking analogy, they do not tell us if the value of a project is distributed equitably among stakeholders, or if depleted capitals are actually being regenerated.
They just tell us we're slightly slower at doing damage.
Exactly. And a slower rate of destruction is still destruction.
Wow. Yeah. Which brings us to how the business world is currently trying to track these impacts. Because once we admit that financial capital isn't the only metric that matters, we have to look at the global frameworks that attempt to measure the rest of it.
The rules of the road, as the guide calls them.
Right. And if you look at the landscape right now, there is an absolute alphabet soup of acronyms out there.
Well, there really is. And it can be incredibly overwhelming for project managers.
Yeah.
But they each serve a very specific mechanical purpose in sustainability reporting.
Let's walk through them real quick, because understanding how they function is key for you listening. So you've got GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative, and that one specifically looks outward, right? Measuring how your project impacts the world. Then you have SSB and ISSB, which look inward at how sustainability issues impact your financial performance.
You're right.
Then you have TCFD for climate-related financial risk, the UN SDGs, which are the 17 Global Development Goals, and the Kunming-Montreal framework, which is entirely focused on halting biodiversity loss.
Right. And the crucial takeaway here is how these frameworks interact, particularly the outward focus of GRI and the inward focus of SSB and ISSB.
Okay.
Because when you synthesize those two perspectives, you get a concept called dual materiality.
Dual materiality.
Yeah. Any modern project must ask two fundamental questions. First, what are we doing to the world? That is the outward view.
Like, for example, if you are building a new solar farm, are you displacing prime agricultural land?
What?
Or disrupting local wildlife?
Exactly. And second, you ask, what will the world do to us? That's the inward view. How will changing government subsidies or new carbon taxes or even extreme weather events affect a project's bottom line?
Okay, I think of dual materiality like a two-way mirror.
Oh, I like that.
Or like a double-entry accounting ledger. On one side of the ledger, you are tracking the financial capital you are withdrawing from the market. And on the exact opposite side, you are tracking the natural resources you are withdrawing from the earth.
That's a perfect way to visualize it.
But, and this is a big, but even with that perfect balanced ledger, there is still a massive glaring flaw. Neither side of that ledger tells you the total reserves left in the vault.
No, it doesn't.
You know exactly what you were taking out, but you have literally no idea if the bank is about to go entirely bankrupt. Even with a two-way mirror, you still don't have a thermometer. You don't know if the room is actually on fire.
Yes.
Yes.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is exactly why dual materiality is insufficient on its own, and why the guide introduces a critical third dimension. Context-based thresholds.
Okay, the thresholds.
Right. It is not enough to just identify that, hey, your water usage is an outward impact on a river and an inward risk if the river dries up.
Okay.
You have to ask the ultimate question. Are these impacts actually within sustainable limits? Are they within the scientific carrying capacity of that specific environment?
Which means we need a way to measure the vault. We need the actual math of sustainability to measure those thresholds. And the guide gives us the specific formula to do that. It's S equals A over N.
Yes, the sustainability quotient. So S stands for sustainability performance.
Yeah.
A is the actual impacts your project is having. You know, the tons of carbon emitted or the gallons of water used.
Right.
And N is the normative impacts. That
Okay.
is the carrying capacity threshold or the absolute limit of what is sustainable for your specific context.
And this is where you really have to pay attention, because the math actually flips depending on what kind of capital you're measuring.
It does. This is a very important distinction.
For natural capital like water usage or carbon emissions, you want your S score to be less than or equal to 1.0. Because if it's exactly 1.0, you are taking exactly your fair share of the resource. You do not want to exceed that limit. But for non-environmental capital like paying living wages or investing in community health, your S score must be greater than or equal to 1.0. You need to meet or exceed your obligations to human and social capital.
That is exactly right. Let's ground this in a highly specific example provided in the text. Imagine a major construction project emitting 50,000 tons of carbon.
Okay, 50,000 tons.
Under the old dual materiality model, the project managers might look at that and say, okay, this 50,000 tons poses a $2 million financial risk inwardly due to potential carbon taxes, and it obviously impacts the climate outwardly. But without knowing the threshold, they don't actually know if 50,000 tons is sustainable or not.
Right, so they have to do the math. They calculate their fair science-based allocation for that specific project based on global climate goals. Let's say their N, their denominator, is only 20,000 tons. So you take their actual impact, the 50,000, and divide it by the normative limit, the 20,000. Their S equals 2.5.
Which means they are 2.5 times over their absolute limit.
Wow.
They are highly unsustainable and fundamentally failing the natural capital test, even if they proudly announce that they reduced their emissions from 60,000 tons last year.
Here's where it gets really interesting. To actually find these variables, to figure out what your actual impacts, your A even are, you can't just guess. Project teams need a diagnostic tool.
They do.
And the guide provides one called the P5 framework. It stands for product, process, people, planet, and prosperity.
Right. The P5 framework acts as the input lens for the entire project. It basically forces you to look at every single angle. You aren't just looking at the carbon emissions of the final product once it's built.
Right, it's bigger than that.
Much bigger. You are evaluating the fairness and transparency of your procurement process. You are looking at the people, ensuring safe labor conditions and fair wages for the workers building it. You evaluate the planet impacts, like biodiversity loss or waste generation during construction. And you look at prosperity, determining if the project is actually generating local economic wealth or just extracting it.
So, when you are listening to your own company's next big all-hands meeting and the CEO stands up and says, "We are thrilled to announce we have reduced our emissions by 25% this year," you should immediately be thinking about this formula, S equals A over N.
Absolutely.
That reduction is great, but what is the S score? What is the denominator? Are they going from an S of 5 to an S of 4? Because if they are still operating 4 times over the sustainable limit, and that 25% reduction is just incremental padding.
It completely changes how you interpret corporate claims. You stop looking at the relative change and start looking for the absolute threshold.
It's eye-opening.
But, having this mathematical formula is one thing. Actually integrating it into the daily, often chaotic grind of project management is another challenge entirely.
Oh, for sure.
How does a team trace this rigorous math through the actual life cycle of a project, from the first kickoff meeting to the final sign-off?
And that is where the SMP comes in, the Sustainability Management Plan. The guy is very clear that this isn't just like a dusty compliance binder that sits on a shelf somewhere.
No, not at all.
It is a living, breathing document that serves as the bridge between the daily, on-the-ground project activities and the lofty corporate ESG commitments made by the board.
And it evolves continuously with the project. It starts way back in the pre-project phase with a preliminary impact screening. This is a high-level pass just to catch the massive risks early, before major capital is committed.
Makes sense.
Then, as you move into the discovery and planning phase, the team uses that P5 lens we just discussed to create a comprehensive impact register. They're documenting every potential way the project will interact with those 5 capitals.
Okay, so then you move into the design phase. You have this massive list of impacts from the register, but obviously you can't tackle everything at once, so it becomes a material topics management table.
Right.
This is where you decide how you are going to handle the most critical issues. Then, during delivery, when the cement is actually pouring and the software is being coded, you are actively monitoring progress against that table, constantly tracking your S score.
Exactly.
And finally, it ends with a verification checklist in the closure phase and a benefits tracker post-project to ensure the promised value is actually realized long-term.
Spot on. But the critical mechanism in the middle of all that, the tool used to decide what actually makes it from the massive impact register into the material topics management table, is called the materiality test.
Okay, the materiality test.
Traditionally, businesses used a flat 2-dimensional matrix for this. On the x-axis, you plot stakeholder significance. Basically, does the local community or do our investors care about this issue?
Yeah.
And on the y-axis, you plot financial relevance.
Yeah.
Does this issue cost us a significant amount of money?
But remember, we need to know the reserves in the vault. We need context. So for context-based projects, the guide adds a z-axis to this matrix, threshold proximity.
Exactly. The z-axis asks, regardless of cost or public opinion, how close is this specific ecological or social impact to exceeding its absolute limit?
Okay, let me throw a real-world scenario at this, because this is where the theory hits the boardroom table.
Let's hear it.
What if a project is operating in a community that just doesn't care about water conservation? Maybe it's an area with low environmental awareness, so it scores incredibly low on stakeholder significance.
Okay.
And let's say the local municipality heavily subsidizes commercial water, so it's dirt cheap. It scores incredibly low on financial relevance. On a traditional 2D matrix, wouldn't that issue just drop to the bottom left corner and get completely ignored?
Under the old paradigm, absolutely. It would be dismissed as immaterial because it doesn't threaten the project's PR or its budget.
Right.
But under this new framework, the z-axis threshold proximity fundamentally changes the rules of engagement. The guide illustrates this brilliantly with an example of a project located in the Rio Grande Basin.
Okay.
In that specific basin, current water withdrawal is operating at 150% over the renewable capacity. The entire basin is critically stressed. It is physically running out of water.
150% over capacity. That means the water is literally disappearing faster than it can replenish.
Precisely.
Mm.
So under the z-axis rules, because the ecological threshold is in a critical state of overshoot, any water usage by that project becomes automatically material.
It triggers an override.
It demands urgent, immediate intervention from the project managers, regardless of the financial cost of fixing it and regardless of local PR. You cannot ignore the water depletion simply because it's cheap to buy or unpopular to talk about.
Hmm.
The physical limit of the ecosystem dictates the materiality, not human convenience.
That is such a crucial safeguard. It removes the human bias and the economic loopholes from the equation and forces the business to let the science speak.
It does.
But let's be real for a second. Calculating the exact planetary threshold for every single drop of water, every ton of carbon, and every living wage calculation for every single project around the globe. I mean, that is incredibly hard. It requires massive data sets. It's daunting.
Oh, it is deeply daunting, and the guide is highly pragmatic about this reality. Most organizations today simply do not have the historical data, the specialized scientific resources, or the budget to jump straight into calculating precise carrying capacities for every single impact on day one.
Right, which is why the guide outlines 3 levels of maturity. It gives organizations a realistic, phased pathway to actually pull this off so they don't get paralyzed by the need for perfection.
Yes, let's break down that maturity framework.
Yeah.
Level 1 is incremental sustainability. The operating philosophy here is simple. We are improving compared to our past performance.
This is essentially the starting line for beginners. It's the doing less bad phase we talked about earlier.
Yes. Organizations at level 1 are tracking relative improvements, like a 20% reduction in waste. But the absolute key requirement for level 1 in this guide is unflinching honesty.
Okay.
A level 1 project must transparently state in its reporting that they are only achieving incremental improvements, and they must openly admit that they do not actually know if they are truly sustainable yet because they have not calculated their context-based thresholds.
Then, once you have your data collection processes dialed in, you graduate to level 2. Context-based sustainability. This is where you actually introduce the S equals A over N formula. You set strict science-based targets.
Right. And at level 2, the transparency goes even deeper. You are rigorously calculating your limits, and you are transparently admitting exactly where you are failing to meet them.
Like saying, we're not there yet.
Exactly. For instance, a level 2 report might say, our water withdrawal is currently at an S score of 7.1 in a stressed basin. We acknowledge we are in severe overshoot, and we require an 86% absolute reduction to hit our target of an S score less than or equal to 1 over. It's rigorous, it's threshold aligned, and it leaves no room to hide.
And finally, you reach the pinnacle. Level 3. Regenerative sustainability. At this level, your S score is consistently less than or equal to 1.0 for all environmental impacts and greater than or equal to 1.0 for all social impacts. You aren't just doing no harm anymore, you are actively restoring depleted capitals.
You are actively healing the ecosystem you operate in and purposefully building measurable wealth and resilience within the local community.
So what does this all mean? Think of this maturity framework like a personal fitness journey. Level 1 is finally getting off the couch and walking around the block. You're tracking your daily steps, and you are undeniably healthier than you were yesterday. But you aren't an athlete yet. Level 2 is context-based. You are tracking your heart rate zones, mapping your exact mileage, and training systematically to run a marathon. You know exactly how far you have to go, and you know how fast you need to run to beat the cutoff time.
I love this analogy.
And level 3, that's finishing the marathon, crossing the finish line, and then going back out onto the course to clean up all the trash left behind by the other runners.
That's brilliant. This raises an important question, though, regarding corporate culture. Are companies truly willing to be honest about being at level 1?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is. The immense temptation in the corporate world is to use level 1 metrics, like that simple 20% reduction in waste, to falsely claim they have already crossed the finish line of the marathon. This guide forcefully demands honesty over greenwashing. You declare your maturity level, and you publicly own the gap between where you currently are and where the scientific threshold requires you to be.
It is incredibly refreshing to read a framework that prioritizes cold, hard truth over glossy PR brochures. Let's recap this journey for everyone listening. We started by moving away from the outdated mono-capitalist iron triangle of just scope, time, and cost. We embraced multi-capitalism, recognizing that we must value natural, human, social, and constructed capitals right alongside economic ones.
And we learned that claiming a project is less bad is a dangerous illusion, unless we use the S equals A over N quotient to tell us if we're actually operating within sustainable limits.
Right. And we explored how the Sustainability Management Plan, the SMP, acts as that living, evolving document, tracking this mathematical truth through the three-dimensional materiality matrix across a project's entire life cycle. It really is a comprehensive end-to-end toolkit for project managers.
It absolutely is. And, synthesizing all of this leaves us with a rather profound implication for the future of business and leadership.
Oh, definitely.
If the future of project management requires strict, unapologetic adherence to natural and social thresholds, where a project is fundamentally deemed a failure by the market, if it depletes an aquifer, even if it generates $1 billion in pure profit, how will this shift rewrite the very definition of career success or fiduciary duty for the professionals leading these initiatives tomorrow?
That's a huge shift.
Right. Will we see a day in the near future when a project manager's year-end bonus is tied not to their profit margin, but directly to their S equals A over N score?
Wow. Imagine that reality. A massive financial bonus based entirely on the denominator.
It changes everything.
It really does. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. The next time you see a glossy sustainability report or a flashy corporate press release, I challenge you. Keep looking for the denominator. Until next time, keep digging deeper.